Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Voyagers. So what Voyagers is essentially about is basically it takes place in the distant future where Earth is at a point where it's just become uninhabitable. So a bunch of these newborn kids are placed in this spaceship along with Colin Farrell where he's going to look after them. They're going to be on the spaceship for about 80 years until they're able to find a planet that is more hospitable and somewhere that is, safe for their grandchildren to live and things like that. And he also has been placing them on this blue liquid that makes them very dull and docile and basically gives them basically rids them of any emotion or sexual desire whatsoever. And when eventually the kids find out about this being a thing, they decide to go off of it, and in doing so, this gets them to further explore the ideas of sex, greed, and power that they have been robbed of throughout their life. So, Voyagers overall, I was not really excited for this film. I thought there were definitely some interesting ideas that they could have maybe dived into, but overall, it just wasn't really a film that was grabbing me all that much. It was just kind of like a new release that came out, and as expected, it's not very good. I don't think this is a terrible film or anything, but it's easily one of the most dull space films that I have seen in quite a long time. There really is not a lot that I have to say about this film because it really just kind of feels like nothing at the end of the day. There are things that the film wants to do, but it just doesn't really dive into it in the way that it should. There's a lot of things that I don't like about this movie, but we're just getting into it starting off with the cast. And that's the thing. This is definitely a talented cast. There's a lot of actors in here that I do very much enjoy, but really, there's not a ton to say about this acting because I didn't really feel anyone stood out to me all that much. Like, Sheridan, he does an okay job in the film. He's definitely, fine here. Lily Rose Depp probably gave the most impressive performance. Like, I feel like she had the most to work with, so she probably is, like, the big standout for me here. Fiona Whitehead, though, on the other hand, I was not a fan of at all. He was just taking this... He was way too over the top, and he also made it way too obvious, like, where his character was going to go. Nothing about him was subtle, and I just was not a huge fan of his performances. The rest of the performances here really aren't that great either. Colin Farrell is in the movie, but don't expect too much from him because he really doesn't have all that much to do here. Again, just really not a lot to say about the acting. No one really stuck out to me. Nobody really did anything to make some sort of an impact, so I really don't have much to say about the acting overall. However, we got to get to the stuff that really sinks this film, and I think really brings it down, and that's the directing and the writing, which Neil Burger, as a director, already was a red flag because he's not someone that normally impresses me. He's done things like Divergent, and The Upside was a pretty good film, but not really because of his directing, because of other aspects, and his directing here, as expected, is very uninspired. It just doesn't really feel like he had a lot of passion into this movie. It's very blandly directed. You can watch this film, and I feel like you're going to get a lot of parallels to not just space movies, but other YA films. It has a lot more in comparison with, like, other YA films like, say, Divergent or The Hunger Games or something like that, and it just doesn't have much of a style overall. The film is really lacking in those areas, and I just don't think that Burger really did much at all in terms of directing. I had a hard time figuring out, what is his real style here? What is his real goal with the film? I just didn't really feel like he had one overall, and I just don't think he did a very good job. The film in general is kind of a slog as a result because he just doesn't do a lot to make it interesting. Getting into the writing here, that's a whole other can of worms because the writing here could not be any more dull and generic than it really is. Especially in terms of the story itself, which is a very intriguing one. I like the idea that suddenly when the adults, when these kids aren't supervised and they're off this blue liquid and they're suddenly, there's a lot more energy, there's a lot of emotion out of them. I like that idea a lot. But the problem is they really don't do much with that concept. It becomes very basic. There's like a group of kids that don't want to partake in this and they want to do the right thing because they know it's the right thing. And then there's the other side that just want to be rambunctious and want to do reckless and irrational things. And they start becoming very evil and it goes in a very stereotypical direction. I was really hoping that was not the case for this film, but they really don't do a lot. It feels like they just give you the bare minimum of what you can really do with all this stuff. But what they didn't think about is just the idea that, like, these kids have not really been able to do anything that they've wanted to within their life because they've been conditioned to act a certain way, to feel a certain way, and it feels like even when they suddenly are free of that, they don't act all that differently. It doesn't feel like that switch really does happen in the way the film wants it to, and so that definitely did bring down the film for me quite a bit. It also doesn't help that for a significant portion of this film, it really doesn't feel like there's a lot going on here. It feels very directionless, not just because Neil Berger isn't putting effort into it, but also because it just doesn't feel like there's a lot going on within the story. There's so many scenes in this movie of characters just like walking around. As I was watching this happen, I started to check out, and instead it just made me want to play Among Us because it's just characters walking around a spaceship, and that's what it felt like to me. Like, I felt like I was watching a bad like live action like reenactment of Among Us. I mean, it doesn't help that there's literally a scene where like Lily Rose Depp is like, oh, he wants to see you in the med bay. I'm like, oh, really? Well, who's the imposter? Like, I started to care way less about what was going on in the movie and more just about playing Among Us. And like, that alone should tell you just how uninteresting a lot of this film really is. The characters themselves are kind of nothing. I mean, Christopher as our lead character, he's just like the do-gooder. He's the guy that wants to do the right thing, but he keeps getting himself involved in these situations that are uncalled for. It's not really what he wants to do. And so, you know, he's trying to get back on the right track, and just, we've seen this character beforehand. There's really nothing to him, and like I said, Ty Sheridan's like fine in the role, but like they just don't do a lot with him as a character. And then Zach as a character, especially, this character is horrible, that we have in the film. And then I will say, the character of Stella isn't as bad. There's a little bit more depth given to her as a character. You get to see sort of like the reputation that she has and the relationship that she's formed with Colin Farrell. It's interesting where she's going, but they just don't really dive into the stuff I wanted them to with her character. And then Zach, especially as a character, though, oh my god, don't get me started with him. The character of Zach in this movie goes in such a predictable direction. You know from the second that he enters the screen exactly where he's going to go, and they just don't really do anything different with him at all. Every single thing that happened in this movie was predictable to me. There wasn't a single time in this movie where I was like, oh my god, I can't believe they went in this direction. Everything just felt so by the book in that way, and just as scripted as these characters' lives are supposed to be, and that should never be the case. And you know where every single one of these characters are going to go. Christopher and Stella especially. You know the second that they meet, they're eventually going to start liking each other. You're just kind of waiting for it to happen, and when it does, it just feels forced. It feels like this is happening because the script demands that it should. Zach going rogue in the way that he does in the film, it happens because the script demands it. Nothing feels like a natural direction because, again, we really don't know a lot about these characters, and so they don't really do a lot with them overall. The film just never really goes in that interesting of a direction. Again, I feel like there was a lot this film could have been saying about the idea of greed, about the idea of our futures being predetermined and what we can do in order to change our fates. You know, I think that's an interesting idea, but the film never really wants to dive into that storyline. The film never really wants to do the things that I wanted them to, and so I think that overall really does bring the film down for me quite significantly, and I think that's one of the things that just makes this film feel as dull and boring as it really is. Also, I have to say, the dialogue in this film is truly awful. I mean, every single line, it sounds like they're reading off a script, and everyone just kind of talks like this throughout the whole movie, and they don't have any emotion whatsoever, and it's really, really cringy to watch at points in terms of the dialogue here. And also, I touched upon before how Colin Farrell is really not in this movie all that much, and there is a good reasoning for him not to be here. Like, it's not like he just, like, kind of disappears and they never bring him up again. But I actually do think that the film would have been better if he was a little bit more involved with the story, especially, like I said, there's a specific plot involving him and Lily Rose Depp, and I think they could have maybe dived into that a bit more, and it would have actually made the film a lot better as a result. But because they make the choice to limit his screen time and really not have him in the movie all that much, the film really does suffer as a result. So it's another one of those things where, like, Neil Burger has multiple opportunities to make this film really good and really interesting, but he seemed to dodge every single one of them, and as a result, we're given the most boring, distilled version of it as possible. The cinematography as well is fine. I mean, the shots of the spaceship are fine, but it's also like a really big spaceship, and like they're just not a lot going on cinematography-wise here. There's some good shots, definitely, but nothing really stuck out to me overall. I think they definitely could have done some more stuff there. You'd think there'd be a lot of action going on in this movie, but there's really not. Like I said, there's a lot of walking around here, and I mean, the walking around looks fine. Like, it's not badly filmed or anything, but it's a lot of walking around. Like, there's not really much to say in terms of cinematography. The score, I don't remember at all, so I don't think it was that great of a score. And the editing, this film is only about 108 minutes long, and I think it definitely needed to be a bit longer. I think there was a lot more that they could have dived into with some of these characters. There were a lot more places they could have taken them. Stella, especially, like I said, I wanted to see more of the relationship that she formed with Colin Farrell. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on there, but no such storyline really does exist, and so that really did bring down the film for me. Ultimately, Voyagers just didn't really do much of anything. I think there were a lot of interesting ideas that this film could have latched onto. There are a lot of things that they could have definitely done, but ultimately what we have here is just a very generic story about teenage rebellion, and it's one that we've seen 1,000 times before. It has some decent performances, it has some good ideas in there, but overall it's a film that, as I was watching it, I just became less interested as the film. I just became increasingly more disinterested as the film was going on, and the way it wrapped up especially was just so laughable to me. I could not believe the way the movie ended up ending. I thought it was completely ridiculous where they decided to go with it. I think this is a film that could have actually dived into some interesting things, but it needed different direction, it needed different writing, it needed a lot of different things in order to really make an impact, and sadly, it really did fail to do that for me. Honestly, as a film, Voyagers just kind of feels like nothing. I feel like there's a lot more that this film could have been. There's a lot more things the film could have dived into, but instead, it goes in the most cliche, generic direction that you really could have expected it to. So as a result, it's a film that made absolutely no impact on me whatsoever, except wanting me to think of other things that I could watch and other games that I could play. So obviously, it's a film that just really didn't do much at all for me. So unfortunately, I am going to give Voyagers overall a C-. And oh my god, once again, I forgot to do an outro to this video. I don't know what's wrong with me. 2 movie reviews in a row, and I have done that. But either way, guys, in my review of Voyagers, the most you guys saw this movie overall, left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.